Welcome! I'm so happy to have this time with you today to talk about James Baldwin. He is my favorite author of all time and a true soulmate who's helped me so much to grow and become whole. So, first thing of Baldwin's that I ever read was in an American Lit class in college. It was a short story called Sonny's Blues about an older brother remembering his younger brother who was an alcoholic and a jazz musician. And the last few pages of the story, he goes and remembers hearing his brother play in the club and how the other musicians held back, waiting for his brother to bring forth from the depths a sound and an expression that couldn't have been uttered otherwise. And that when it finally comes, they just corroborate it with their rhythm, with their harmony, this witness of music. And it really was compelling, not only because it was beautifully written, but it also touched a part of me that was really deep. I had always loved music since I was a girl. My mom said I couldn't leave the house without stopping to play the piano because it was kind of like on the way out the door. And the man who abused me in high school, I mentioned in another video, he was an ordained minister, but was also the first person to identify that I could write music. And so for years after the abuse, I couldn't play. And when I opened my mouth to sing, I would choke. It was for years. So to read James Baldwin write about music in that way really broke off the lie that my abuser was the only one who could understand that part of myself and reminded me of who I was. And so I was a fast fan of Baldwin's. I published a couple of articles on Baldwin, and one was on this incredible novel. If you want to read anything of his, this is like should be required reading for every American. It's called Just Above My Head. And the paper I wrote on it is called Incestuous Violence and Brotherly Love in Baldwin's Just Above My Head, because in it he really writes about how we're one country, North and South, and how we're one family, black and white. And he describes abuse in a way that is so full of understanding, that he says that it was no less than brother on brother, the violence, and no less than kissing cousin, chaining kissing cousin. And that's because survivors of suffering understand that the perpetrators are not other than we are, that they are our uncles, our fathers, our aunties, our brothers, our cousins. And we have to, those of us who have survived, reckon with the humanity of what it means that those who perpetrate violence are among us and that we're related to them. And we're not only related to them in terms of like it being a literal, flesh and blood relation, but also that it's only grace that keeps us from that capability of the same evil. Not to say that it excuses it, but to say that we need to reckon and take account of it, and that we should be humbled by it and sobered by it, rather than dismissing it as something that is other. And what's so interesting is that survivors know that and really do face the reality of our proximity to violence in a way that frankly is biblical. I mean, the Bible, it says that every enemy descended from one brother. So this concept that we are related, that violence is incest, and that the healing for it comes from a love that goes beyond a brotherly love, really, is what's needed in order to heal. That in the same way that sex can violate and be used as a weapon, that it also can be used for a deep healing and a comfort that goes beyond the division of race and sexuality. In the way that Baldwin writes about it, it's so fluid. And I think that's because he really understands the power and the freedom of love to heal and to bind up those things that constructions of walls between us. Perpetrators, on the other hand, like to deny anything that has to do with suffering, as though they have made it on their own, as though they have nothing to do with the weakness of suffering, although to suffer and survive is a strength that no perpetrator could ever really embrace or know. And we have a leader in the United States right now who is wanting to erase Black history and African American culture, literature, even the very words and from our vocabulary. And it's just unconscionable because it erases our humanity. To be really free, to be really united, to be really one country, we have to embrace all that we are. And as I said, that's something that survivors know and have reckoned with. And it's something that the white members of our country and that those who are in power need to reckon with if they are going to be free and whole. I'm going to read you a quote from the end of Sonny's Blues, that first story of Baldwin's I ever read, because it sort of touches on this in a way that is really important. It says, "The blues are not about anything very new. He and his boys were keeping it new at the risk of ruin, destruction, madness, and death in order to find new ways to make us listen. For while the tale of how we suffer, how we are delighted, and how we triumph is never new, it must always be heard. Freedom lurked around us, and I understood at last that he could help us be free if we would listen, that he would never be free until we did." And we are meant to be the land of the free and the home of the brave. It's one of our lyrics of our anthems. But it does take bravery and courage to face the parts of ourselves that have caused other people to suffer, that have inflicted violence, that are ugly, and that are really evil parts, the sin in us. But we will never be free until we can face those things. Because if you have to spend your life avoiding and erasing parts of who you are, dissociating from that part of you, you're never whole and you're never free. It's interesting with trauma as well, that people think that your survival or your healing is evident when you can talk about it without feeling sad, when actually it's the exact opposite. Being able to feel the full meaning while you're talking about it is the true healing that takes place. It's not when you're all better and not feeling sad. It's actually being able to feel sad in connection with it that is the true healing that happens from trauma. And so our country needs to reckon with this collective trauma in a way where we can lament and mourn so that we're not afraid of it anymore. And we can be free to move forward in wholeness and steward the past in a way that will help us to walk in a better future. Been thinking a lot about the importance of suffering in relation to faith and how we do that a lot with Christianity as well, trying to deny the parts of ourselves that were in sin before. Now that we're clean, now that we're saved, we don't talk about that. That was then, we are now new creation. But the truth is that so much of our lives take place in this gray area where, yes, what the Lord has done for us is complete, but we're still working it out. We're still walking toward the cleanness. We're still walking toward the full realization of what that means. And in order to reach that point, we have to take with us all that has been. And while we're still going back into sin and coming back out of it and being in things that we keep hidden, but still being in light, we have to live in this faith that is able to embrace both the truth of what was and the truth of God's promise in the midst of what was, in the midst of our powerlessness. And so this concept of suffering is something that I think is really important for us to grasp, like the blues, that we'll never be free if we don't embrace the suffering we have caused others, the sin in us, and the story of survival that comes from suffering. I recorded a video about a year ago on the Psalms, and I was talking about how this song was on my heart. You don't know what love is until you know the meaning of the blues. Until you've had a love you've had to lose. You don't know what love is. You don't know how hearts burn for love that cannot live yet never dies. Until you greet the dawn with sleepless eyes, you don't know what love is. And it's true, you know, Jesus is a man of sorrow, acquainted with grief. He's the one whose love couldn't live but never died. He's the one who greeted the dawn with sleepless eyes. And we won't know love. We won't know acceptance. We won't know wholeness until we know the meaning of the blues until we reckon with suffering. And the Lord, when he rose from the dead, did not erase his wounds as though they never happened. His wounds, Nicholas Wollstonecraft wrote about this in his book, Lament for a Son. Jesus didn't erase his wounds in rising. He was identified by them. His wounds are what identifies him to his disciples. His wounds are what appear in glory. When you turn to see the triumphant Lamb, you see him slain. And so this is something that we need to grasp. If our Savior doesn't get rid of the evidence of his suffering and glory, how much more should we embrace the parts of ourselves that we think are ugly, that we think are evidence of sorrow, pain, weakness, sin? He didn't erase that himself. And so to be in glory is to be fully who we are, to be both those who were slain and those who have survived. The history of African Americans in our country is, and similar to what I experienced, that the foolishness of what was preached, the perversion of truth that was going forth, the gospel that was being shared by people who were not living it out, still saved those who were being oppressed, just as it did in my life. There was still a saving faith that arose. And this is important because we're at another moment in our history that is similar to it right now, where the religious right has taken over and trying to oppress. Where do we find hope? We find hope in the fact that that has happened before, and that it didn't stop the truth of God's grace from reaching those who were hungry, from reaching those who were in need, and putting to shame those who were parading themselves as right. So I exhort you during this time when things are being banned and there's a move to erase suffering, to erase what we have done, to erase Black history as though it doesn't have to do with us. It has everything to do with us and our ability to move forward as a country that is brave and that is free requires that we claim Black history as American history, that it truly is, that we are interconnected, that we belong to one another, that what has been done in the past has been done to our brother, our sister, our niece, our nephew, and that in the same way that those who have survived acknowledge that we are family, we must also corroborate that witness to move forward as a whole nation. So thank you for watching.